What if the voice you're following is leading you in the wrong direction? What if not every leader who looks trustworthy actually cares about you? And what if the difference between safety and danger comes down to one simple thing: whose voice you recognize? The image Jesus paints is simple, almost ordinary. A sheepfold, a gate, a shepherd, sheep gathered inside, vulnerable yet protected. To the people listening, this wasn't abstract, it was daily life. They understood what it meant to care for sheep, to guard them, to lead them. But Jesus isn't just talking about animals, he's talking about people. He says anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. Right away, the tone shifts. This is not just a peaceful countryside scene. There is danger here. Deception. Threat. Because not everyone who approaches the sheep comes with good intentions. Some come to take. Some come to use. Some come to destroy. And the sheep, they are not always able to tell the difference at first glance. That's what makes this message so important. Because in a world filled with voices, opinions, influences, promises, it's easy to assume that all guidance is good guidance. But Jesus draws a clear line. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The shepherd doesn't sneak in, he doesn't manipulate, he doesn't force his way through. He comes openly, rightfully, with authority that doesn't need to hide. And then Jesus says something deeply personal. The sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. By name, not as a group, not as a number, individually, known, recognized, valued. This is not distant leadership, this is relationship. The shepherd doesn't drive the sheep from behind. He walks ahead of them and they follow, not because they're forced to, but because they know his voice. That detail changes everything. Because it means safety isn't just about where you are, it's about who you trust. The sheep don't follow every voice. They don't respond to strangers. In fact, Jesus says they run from unfamiliar voices. Why? Because they don't recognize them. There's a built-in awareness, a kind of spiritual instinct. But here's the tension. That kind of recognition doesn't happen instantly. It develops over time, through connection, through listening, through experience. The more the sheep hear the shepherd, the more they learn his voice. And the more they learn his voice, the harder it becomes to be misled. But what happens when that connection is weak? What happens when the voice of the shepherd becomes unfamiliar? That's when confusion enters. That's when other voices start to sound convincing. Voices that promise freedom, but lead to harm. Voices that sound confident, but lack truth. Voices that appeal to desire, but ignore consequences. Jesus doesn't ignore that reality. He addresses it directly. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. There's no sugarcoating, no vague language. The intent is clear. Destruction, not sometimes, not accidentally, but by design. And then comes the contrast. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. That's the difference. Not just survival, not just existence, but fullness. Real life, purpose, peace, direction. This is what the true shepherd offers. And then Jesus reveals something even deeper. I am the good shepherd, not just a guide, not just a teacher, the good shepherd. And what defines him? The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. This is where the image becomes powerful, because most leaders protect themselves first. Most people look out for their own safety, but the good shepherd does the opposite. He sacrifices, he gives. He places the well-being of the sheep above his own. And Jesus contrasts this with the hired hand. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. That's the difference between responsibility and relationship. The hired hand works for a wage. The shepherd cares because the sheep are his. When danger comes, the hired hand leaves because the cost is too high, but the shepherd stays because the sheep matter more than the risk. And this isn't just a story about ancient fields and animals. It's a reflection of real life, because there are voices today that sound like leadership, voices that claim to guide, to protect, to offer something meaningful. But when things get difficult, when challenges come, when truth becomes costly, those voices disappear. They were never truly committed. They were never truly invested. And then there's the voice of the shepherd. Steady, consistent, present, even in danger, even in uncertainty, even when it costs everything. Jesus says, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. There's mutual recognition. Not forced, not artificial, but real. And then he says something unexpected. I have other sheep that are not of this sheepfold. I must bring them also. This expands the picture. The shepherd's care is not limited, not exclusive, not confined to one group. His voice reaches beyond boundaries, beyond assumptions, beyond what people thought was possible. And those sheep will listen. They will respond. They will come. Because truth, when it is recognized, draws people in, not by pressure, but by clarity. But not everyone accepts this message. Some hear it and reject it. Some say he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Others pause. They question. They wonder, can a demon open the eyes of the blind? And once again, the division appears. The same words, the same message, but completely different reactions. Why? Because hearing is not the same as listening, and listening is not the same as understanding. The difference lies in the heart. Some people listen to confirm what they already believe. Others listen to discover what is true. And that difference shapes everything. The Good Shepherd speaks, but not everyone recognizes the voice. Because recognition requires familiarity, and familiarity requires time, attention, and willingness. So the question becomes personal. Whose voice are you following? Not just in theory, but in practice, in decisions, in direction, in the quiet moments when no one else is influencing you. What voice shapes your thinking? What voice defines your choices? Because not all voices lead to life. Some lead to confusion, some lead to emptiness, some lead to destruction, slowly, subtly, almost unnoticed at first. But the voice of the Good Shepherd, it leads to life. Not always the easiest path, not always the most comfortable, but the most real, the most lasting, the most true. And recognizing that voice isn't about perfection, it's about connection. It's about choosing to listen even when other voices are louder. It's about learning to distinguish between what sounds good and what is good. Because the difference matters, more than we realize. The sheep that follow the shepherd are not stronger, not smarter, not more capable. They are simply responsive. They hear and they follow. And that's where safety is found. Not in control, but in trust. Not in knowing everything, but in knowing the one who leads. And maybe that's the shift we need. From trying to figure out every detail, to learning to recognize the voice that guides. From chasing every new idea, to holding on to what is true. From being led by noise, to being led by clarity. Because in the end, the question isn't just about who the shepherd is. It's about whether we are willing to follow. Not blindly, but trustingly. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Because when you truly know the voice of the Good Shepherd, you don't need to be forced. You don't need to be convinced. You simply know. And that knowing changes everything. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to you, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.